1816 is infamously known as the year without summer. During the spring in 1815, a stratovolcano known as Mount Tambora in Indonesia erupted at a VEI of 7. VEI stands for Volcanic Explosive Index and is a scale similar to that of the Richter scale for earthquakes and the F scale for tornadoes. Now, the VEI scale only goes up to an 8, so Tambora erupting at a 7 was a nearly unprecedented amount of catastrophic damage that was done to the surrounding islands and to the volcano itself. In fact, that eruption was so strong, the height of the volcano was reduced by a third from the catastrophic impact. For a quick comparison, Mount St. Helens in 1980 was a 5, so that was only 2 below what Tambora did. It is estimated that this has been the most powerful volcanic eruption in recorded human history. More than 10,000 lives were lost just from the direct eruption, but the droughts and climate change the eruption caused in the years following might have killed up to an estimated 90,000 more across the world. Because of this eruption, the global temperature dropped by about 0.7 to 1 degree Fahrenheit, which sounds small, but it caused mass crop shortage all over the world, including Europe. As a result of lower temperatures, the summer in 1816 was historically cooler than anything on record, and it still keeps the records for lowest temperatures throughout much of history in Europe. Sorry about my geologic history tangent, I just think this stuff rocks. Hey, what's that you've got there? I promise you there's a point to this. Since the summer weather became stormy and cold and unpleasant, a small group of writers that took up retreat in a lake house in England had to find other ways to entertain themselves. And as the storms blew through England, thunder rattling the windows, lightning flashing outside, a certain poet had an idea. The legend says that Lord Byron challenged everyone present at his villa to come up with the scariest horror novel they could imagine to keep themselves entertained as they were locked inside. And later that night, none other than Mary Shelley herself had an awful nightmare of a creature that would later go on to become her magnum opus, Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, that she would publish in 1818 at just 19 years old. Confinement, darkness, and cold summer storms, something that was entirely too relatable to me in middle school. I first read Frankenstein during a pretty rough part of my life. I'm not going to go through the details, that's way too personal, but by the very end it became a very special book for me. I saw something in myself, not in the ramblings of Victor Frankenstein, but in the creature. I've been trying to reread it every year in October since, to capture the Victorian horror vibes again that I was first attracted to so long ago. And for my Halloween video this year, I figured, hey, Frankenstein, a story that is so deeply close to my heart, would be the perfect topic of discussion. But then I came into a problem. What could be said about Frankenstein that hasn't already been said yet? The book is more than 200 years old, and literature nerds have been tearing it apart and rebuilding it back up for just as long as that. We've got deep dives, thick discussions, and literal dissertations written on Frankenstein. Every word in this novel has been picked apart, like we're Victor Frankenstein trying to understand the creation Mary Shelley published more than 2 centuries ago. What sort of fun, interesting analysis could one person who makes fun little YouTube videos offer on one of the most critically acclaimed works of English literature and what many consider the first sci-fi novel? And then it came to me. Frankenstein is about MPREG. Happy Halloween! So, I'm recording this before Halloween, obviously, so I don't know if we've hit my goal of 4,000 subs. If we did, thank you so much. If not, that's okay. Please like and subscribe and do all that fun YouTube stuff. I'd like to hit 4,000 subs soon anyway, so if I didn't end up hitting it today, maybe we'll hit it later. That will be very funny if I hit 4,000 while editing, but we're getting close. And also, just as a small note, I will be using B-roll from the 1930s film adaptation of Frankenstein in this video. It is not the best adaptation by a mile, but I do enjoy the black and white film aesthetic, and I think it fits perfectly with the spooky season, and the Del Toro version of the film is not out yet, so I can't rip from that. Can't believe it's coming out in November. efforts of sounding like a bit of a loser, I'm going to explain my joke of a thesis first, Frankenstein being about MPREG. MPREG can be a sensitive term to some people, especially to people who are transgender and non-binary, but to clarify, I'm using it as a joke and clickbait to get people's attention. But I think I also deserve an explanation so those who aren't aware of the trope understand what I'm referring to. MPREG is a nickname for the literary trope known as male pregnancy, essentially when a male character becomes pregnant. It's more commonly found in fan fiction, but it has been explored in stories like Junior and the Alien series as either something comedic to explore or a scientific exploration of body horror. Most of the time, the trope is given the monstrous presentation, which I think says a lot about how we treat people who can get pregnant. And yeah, I'm going to be using gender-neutral terms for pregnancy in most of this video. Complain about it in the comments and boost my analytics. Thank you. Anyway, the modern trope that most people associate MPREG comes from, oh god, do I have to explain Omegaverse again? So essentially, the Omegaverse is a genre of erotic speculative fiction based off an incorrect research study on wolves in captivity that gives male characters the ability to be pregnant by a secondary sex designation. I'm really not into the Omegaverse this much, I swear. I don't know how this is becoming a recurring motif in my videos, but typically, MPREG stories center around the impregnation of a cisgender man by another cisgender man. The biology behind that is deeply disturbing and I don't want to talk about it. But most works don't just focus on the making of a baby. They can also focus on the experience of pregnancy itself, from the mood swings, cravings, sickness, and its impact on relationships. The more domestic half, if you will. And this is both the body horror of Frankenstein, literally, and the experience of pregnancy itself on our tragic hero. But before we analyze Victor himself, I think looking at Mary Shelley's own experience with pregnancy is an important place to start, because I don't think we can separate her own experiences of motherhood and birth from the text of Frankenstein itself. Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley was the second and youngest child of the famous feminist writer Mary Wollstonecraft and her husband, William Godwin. However, Mary's mother would die shortly after giving birth to her, about 11 days later, and she was raised by her father. When Mary was 4, William married a neighbor who did not like the relationship between her father and Mary and often drove them apart. In 1814, Mary fell in love with one of her father's friends, a poet by the name of Percy Shelley, who was already married at the time. Legends say that Mary actually lost her virginity to Percy on her mother's grave, which is very Gothic of them. Over the next few years, Mary Shelley would go through a lot in her life personally. Percy's wife Harriet would commit suicide, leaving him open as a bachelor to marry, but the first 3 children Mary attempted to have with Percy would unfortunately pass away shortly after birth. And after only 6 years of being married to Percy himself, he drowned when his sailboat sank, leaving her widowed with her last and only surviving child, Percy Florence Shelley. The last few years of her life were plagued by a brain tumor that killed her at the young age of 53. Yeah, Mary had quite a rough life, and notably, a lot of her trauma centered around childbirth and motherhood. From her mother dying when she was just born to losing 3 of her 4 children, Mary suffered a lot when it came to being a mother and bearing children. So is it really that surprising that her magnum opus could be read as a way Mary was dealing with those horrors she was going through at the time? There is a very good lecture by Ann K. Mellor with the Arizona State University looking at the same idea, Mothering Monsters, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I'll link it below in the description, and it served as a partial inspiration for this video. In the lecture, she explores Frankenstein from a very similar lens, talking about Mary's traumas with childbirth and motherhood to how it reflects in the writing of Frankenstein. She is also the source of this fact I'm going to add here. Mary, after losing her first child, would go on to have recurrent dreams about her baby that she recorded in her journal. Dreamt that my baby came to life again, that it had only been cold and that we rubbed it before the fire and it lived. Awake and find no baby. As Mellor goes on to describe, Mary has been having dreams associated to resurrection with fire for months, before she even put pen to paper and wrote Frankenstein. And while the main idea of Frankenstein had been written at the 1816 retreat, the manuscript itself took much longer to write. By the time it finished, she'd been pregnant 3 times and lost those children so quickly. The mortality rate was high, and she was also very young. She finished the manuscript of Frankenstein when she was 19. She had 3 children before 19, and she's not even technically married at the point, and she was using writing as an outlet for breaking down the worries and anxiety she had about motherhood. It's like kind of obvious. Like, what if my child was born deformed? Would I be able to love my child? Could I want my child to die? Some of what Mary Shelley went through would no doubt be considered postpartum depression today. Pain we still don't fully understand even 2 centuries later, because much research into women's health is still unsurprisingly understudied. And I think we can explore these ideas of the pain of motherhood through the character of Victor Frankenstein himself. Victor Frankenstein is a very interesting character to me. While he's not my favorite character in Frankenstein, he's not so much the mad scientist that modern media equates him to be. Yes, he's a little odd and maybe a little crazy for sure, but he wasn't technically a scientist. He didn't even have a degree. He created the creature in this fit of madness as what is essentially an undergrad, and then his life collapsed around him. Could you imagine that? Finishing a project for a college class that later leads to the murders and deaths of all the people you love dearly, and then ultimately yourself? What? A lot of people tend to read his character as this tortured scientist or science-adjacent figure who is possessed by a fervor for truth and too blinded by curiosity to think about the ethical implications of his actions, who later becomes a deadbeat dad. And while this is a fascinating and slightly humorous take on Frankenstein, I'm here to argue that Victor isn't a dad, he is a deadbeat mom. I mean, technically, Victor created life. Usually fathers just contribute a little bit of DNA and then protect the mother while the baby is gestating. Or at least that's what they're supposed to do, kind of scientifically speaking. One line from chapter 3, while Victor is in the midst of it, reads like it's written to have more of a maternal vibe than a paternal vibe. A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me. This line can be read as Victor playing God, but I think it can also be read as Victor considering himself the mother of a new species of man. He would be the one to create the next species. He would transcend past the role of a father as creating a child and go straight to being a mother, cutting women out of the process entirely. And even though Victor doesn't literally carry the child in a womb, he does work on this body for a period of roughly 9 months and then gives birth the moment that he shocks the creature with electricity, bringing him to life. He didn't just do one thing and call it quits. He toiled over the creation of this creature, literally putting his health online to build a body. He barely sleeps, barely eats, gets sickly, but doesn't stop because in this fervor of curiosity and madness, he is building a baby in a metaphorical womb. My cheek had grown pale with study, and my person had become emaciated with confinement. Sometimes, on the very brink of certainty, I failed, yet I still clung to the hope which the next day or next hour might realize. And later on in chapter 3 as well, every night I was oppressed by a slow fever, and I became nervous to an almost painful degree. The fall of a leaf startled me, and I shunned my fellow creatures as if I had been guilty of a crime. Sometimes I grew alarmed at the wreck I perceived that I had become. The energy of my purpose alone sustained me. My labors would soon end, and I believed that exercise and amusement would then drive away incipient disease, and I promised myself both of these when my creation should be complete. It seems very intentional that Mary Shelley would write Victor's sickliness to mirror that of what a pregnant person could go through. Emotional dysregulation, from fervor to hope to shame to fear, and fevers, even as my book described. Victor's voice breaks, his hands tremble and refuse to help him, and he becomes timid, but jumps wildly from these shakes to passion. Pregnancy pains couldn't be helped back then like they can kind of today, so I'm sure Mary was drawing upon her own experience while she was pregnant with their first child with Percy while they were traveling around Europe. And it wasn't just morning sickness either. Pregnant people tend to have a weakened immune system, which can lead to UTIs, colds, the flu, and other viral infections hitting them harder. And you can even argue that even though Victor had been studying and working on this project for 2 years, he did come a lot of failures. You could even go on to argue that while Victor has been studying and working on this project for 2 years, he came across a lot of failures, and those failures could be interpreted easily as repeated miscarriages. But then, 9 months of work and toil all come to a close in one day in November. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 a.m. The rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when, by the glimmer of a half-extinguished light, I saw the dull eye of the creature open. When, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe, or how delineate the wench, whom with such infinite pains I had endeavored to form? His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful! Great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was that of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly light whiteness. But these luxuriancies only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed the same color as the non-white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion, and straight black lips. Good Lord, that was hard to read. Anyway, the creature was an ugly baby confirmed.
I did your baby!
This is where a lot of people interpret Victor as being a bad father the moment his creation comes to life and he abandons it out of horror and shock. But Victor isn't just leaving to get milk and never returning. He is the mother of this creature, which gives a more profound effect to the abandonment. This isn't a father who sat idly by and then left the mother and child shortly after birth. This is the mother after birth, essentially exploring Mary's most frightening thoughts about motherhood. What would it bring for her to abandon her child, and what if her child killed her? Because remember, Mary's own mother died a few days after she was born. The nanny her father hired to take care of her kids left her when she was 3. Her father, Godwin, remarried to a woman who didn't like her shortly after that. And perhaps there's a reason why the creature is often read to be a more sympathetic victim than a monstrous creation. I personally think Mary was writing the creature like she was writing herself, abandoned by her biological mother and then later rejected by her biological father and stepmother. And perhaps the way that she writes the first confrontation between Victor and the creature is meant to be too relatable. Be calm. I entreat you to hear me before you give vent to your hatred on my devoted head. Have I not suffered enough that you seek to increase my misery? Life, although it may only be an accumulation of anguish, is dear to me, and I will defend it. Remember, thou hadst made me more powerful than thyself. My height is superior to thine, my joints more supple, but I will not be tempted to set myself in opposition to thee. I am thy creature, and I will be even mild and docile to my natural lord and king, if thou wilt also perform thy part, the which you owest me. O Frankenstein, be not equitable to every other, and trample upon me alone, to whom thy justice, and even thy clemency and affection is most due. Remember that I am thy creature. I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel, from whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed. Everywhere I see bliss, from which I alone am irrevocably excluded. I was benevolent and good. Misery made me a fiend. Make me happy, and I shall again be virtuous. After the creature and Victor meet again in chapter 2 of volume 2, the creature has only one request: for companionship, for someone like him so he isn't alone. He threatens Victor to make another being like him, and if Victor does, he will leave him alone. Victor tries to go through with this, but upon having horrifying thoughts about his creature reproducing with a female creature, rather than just not giving the companion any working reproductive organs, Victor scraps the second creature entirely, which leads to many more deaths of the people that Victor cares about, and eventually his own. He dies on the ship of Robert Walton, and the creature is left to wander the ices of the Northern Pole, where he will no doubt meet his own demise too. So if Mary Shelley was just writing about Victor Frankenstein becoming a deadbeat mom, this is where this video would end. I think I have proven that Victor is written to be more of a mother figure than a father figure through the relationship he has with the creature, the way that he became sickly upon creating the creature, and how she used Victor as a outlet for her own fears and experiences with motherhood. But like many other classic works of fiction, there's layers to these like onions. One of the largest onion layers that literary critics like to pull out is this book's commentary on the scientific revolution of the 1800s. Science was easily becoming the hot new thing in the 1800s, with the dawn of the Industrial Revolution and machinery on its way thanks to the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution of the late 18th century. People were enamored by ideas of experimentation, how the natural world worked, and those ideas were reflected in that of Victor Frankenstein himself. Ah, the good old days where people wanted to learn how things worked and not just learn that climate change is a hoax through Fox. Frankenstein is often acknowledged as one of the first ever science fiction novels, and Mary Mary Shelley as the mother of the entire genre. Ironic given this video, I know. Because the ideas of scientific exploration that she dives into are kind of accurate to the time period she wrote it in, and the ideas can also be applicable to today as well. Unlike many women over time, Mary had a very strong education. Her mother, after all, was the Mary Wollstonecraft, a feminist writer, philosopher, and advocate for women's rights, the writer of A Vindication of the Rights of Women, which she argues among many things that women are not inferior to men nor superior. She argues that they are equal and women should have more rights, such as the access to education for the betterment of society. Even though her mother was not around for her as a child, since she died shortly after giving birth to Mary, the fact that William Godwin, her father, also had many intelligent guests around, from other writers to philosophers and scientists, led Mary to absorb education like a sponge in water. And both William Godwin and later her husband Percy Shelley were huge fans of this new thing called science. They often engaged in the ideas and scientific discourse that were around in their day. Percy himself was reportedly fascinated with chemistry and electricity, which, looking at the book, isn't really that surprising now. The way that Mary absorbs these scientific ideas is fascinating for its own video, but I want to focus on how she spit it back up into her work and how her ideas in Frankenstein might be a little radical for the time. Let's start with the first one that many people point out. Not all scientific discoveries are good. Victor spends most of his time in university working on a scientific study of his own, trying to break death, figuring out how to revive the dead, bring new life to corpses, and conquer life itself. This isn't an uncommon idea to explore in fiction. Tales of resurrection have been common throughout the centuries, from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, to even tales in the Bible of resurrection of both Lazarus and, of course, the big man Jesus himself. But where Mary's work differs is through the execution of the story. There isn't any magic or hand of God. Victor brings a life to the dead through science, and like many other tales of resurrection, is shown to not be a good thing. The large argument a lot of these tales make is that it isn't good to bring the dead back to life and break the natural order. There will be consequences. Mary takes this idea and writes it through the scientific concept to remind people who are fascinated by science that some things should not be defied. Despite the innocent curiosity of the time, we shouldn't be too blinded by that into breaking the natural order of life and death, even if it's for a good cause, even if it's for the people they've lost. Because would it be worth it in the end? She doesn't think so, at least in her eyes. And it's not just in Frankenstein where she explores this as well. She also explores the idea of a never-ending life in another short stories of hers, The Mortal Immortal. It is a story of a man named Winsey who drinks an elixir that makes him immortal. The story ends with Winsey deciding to go on a journey to find a way to end his immortality after the death of everyone he loves around him, essentially. So again, it's not just Frankenstein where Mary has explored the consequences of breaking death. It's in some of her other works too, so this is definitely something she was passionate about, which is kind of fascinating on its own. But another major thing Mary Shelley comments on is the idea of creating life without a woman present. It is important to note in this novel, written by a female author, the daughter of one of the largest feminists at the time, has very few female characters in it. The main characters, the ones we hear from, Victor, the creature, and even to an extent Robert Walton himself, are all male. Any supporting female character is either horrifically murdered or dies of just disease in the course of the story, or are just spoken of offhandedly. Women are effectively removed from the story or used as props for the plot, which is common, unfortunately, in a lot of Gothic novels, which one would think would be weird for the daughter of one of the best feminist writers of the time to write a novel without women in it, unless, of course, she was making a statement. Victor's mother dying of scarlet fever before he goes to college propels him first into his research of life and death, and then Elizabeth's death by the hands of the creature propels the plot even further. And like many other female characters at the time, she is a victim of the recklessness of Victor Frankenstein, but unlike other Gothic novels, the novel goes on to show how this is wrong in a stronger way than one written by a man would. Mary Shelley's deep dive into the thoughts she personally experienced or maybe overheard other women experience with regards to pregnancy and motherhood add to this argument. I believe that Mary was making a stronger feminist statement with this book. Nobody should make life without a mother. While Victor is a metaphor for motherhood, we can also see him as a symbol of the people who believe that they could find a way to create humans without needing women present. A very great article in the Pollen Journal titled The Female in Frankenstein, Man's Attempt to Abort Femininity by Lauren Katz explores this idea even more. According to Katz, Frankenstein projects the issues of childbirth the maternal health onto the masculine protagonists in her novel to amplify the unspoken issues of reproductive health that affect predominantly women. To do so, Shelley subverts the traditional female role of motherhood through Frankenstein's character, while simultaneously addressing the concept of male womb envy, or the feverish desire of man to manipulate the advancement of mankind through controlling the means of creation, pregnancy. And after all, what is the one thing that most women can do that most men can't? Carry a child. Mic drop. And in the 1800s, with how sexist society was, and, well, still is if we're going to be honest, I don't think it would be too surprising if Mary Shelley met with scientific minds thanks to her father or husband who believed they could find a way to remove women and mothers from the process of creating life entirely. So through Frankenstein, Mary offers up the argument that men should not remove the mother or become the mother because then they end up with this: an undergrad who wants to abort his child he spent 9 months building because it's too ugly and he doesn't want the responsibility, and the child who grows into the monster not because he was born to be a monster, but because his mother rejected him and made him one. In making a man a mother, Mary argues, you get death and destruction and chaos, essentially. Frankenstein is a very special book to me, and to a lot of people out there too. It's fascinating how classics can transcend the years and become something that evolves into being more topical and nuanced as the years go on, even long after the authors are dead. Reading Frankenstein as a 13-year-old in 8th grade, where I related to the creature's abandonment issues, is a lot different than reading it now in our, let's just say, our current political climate. But that's the part I love so much about reading classic works. You find ways that they're still topical and relatable today, even if it's through the silly idea that starts with Frankenstein is about MPREG. The idea can grow into an actual conversation about creation, scientific responsibility, and empathy. Basically, R.I.P. to Victor Frankenstein, but if I created an 8-foot abomination of an undead monster as an undergrad, I'd be a better parent than he ever would imagine. I really do hate doing conclusions because I feel like it's silly to wrap up everything I've said again in a short thing. So, yeah. Frankenstein is a really good book. If you haven't read it already, I definitely recommend, especially read it if you're looking into watching Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein adaptation that comes out in, as of publishing this video, I think it's November 7th, so like a week. That's kind of exciting. I've been waiting for this for like 2.5, 3 years. I don't remember when he announced it. There's a lot to talk about Frankenstein, which is I think one of the reasons why I love this book so much. I definitely recommend reading it if you haven't already. And even if you have and it's been a few years, it's still a really good book to read. It's very verbose, but it's fun. You know, it's fun in that kind of like campy Gothic novel kind of way. And it's good writing too. Yeah, if you guys liked this video, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Again, I'm trying to get to 4,000 by Halloween, which is technically today, and it'll be very funny if by the time I publish this video, I'll have passed 4,000 already, but I'm not going to go back and change my goal because I think it'll be funny to see how many comments I get. And yeah, I don't have anything else to yap about. Be sure to take care of yourselves out there, and as always, keep your head in the clouds. Ba 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 ba.